Welcome to Rave Reviews Book Club's newest sensation, Eyes on the Book, another addition to our Rave Waves lineup. I am your host, Rox Berkey, broadcasting live from Dallas, Texas. Before we get started, though, I'd like to share a bit of useful information. During our Rave Waves show, we promote other members' books via commercials. If you would like to know how to get your own commercial to air during one of our shows, just visit the Rave Waves tab on the RRBC website for all the details. It's a fantastic way to promote your books. The month of June is when RRBC celebrates Team Appreciation Month. And so I am honored to welcome to today's show RISA author John Fioravanti from Waterloo, Ontario, Canada.
Very good, Rox.
Listeners, if you have any questions or comments for John, I'll be opening up the floor for those questions and comments throughout the show. Your mics will remain muted until we open the floor. We ask that you please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. At that time, your mic will be unmuted, and you may also be able to access the chat function located at the bottom of your screen to type questions or comments to us. Welcome, John, and thank you for joining us today. All of us here at RRBC and RISA are so glad, delighted, all of that, to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
So, let's introduce you to those on the call who may not really know you. Tell us about the real John Fioravanti, the person away from the keyboard.
Well, the real John has been transformed into a full-time caregiver, which is why I haven't been online a whole lot in the last 7 weeks. My wife had a terrible fall and broke her leg in 3 places, her right leg. And so she's been totally immobile for 7 weeks. She can't put any weight on it.
Oh my gosh.
So I have to, I'm doing all the pink jobs in the house and all the blue jobs and helping her get from here to there. And it's, and I'm the guy that hates to cook, never wanted to learn how to cook. Golly. But she said she loves my salads.
Oh, I am so sorry to hear that she took such a nasty fall and she's recovering, but I'm glad she likes your salads.
Yeah.
That's a desperately good thing.
Well, so it certainly gave me a better appreciation for what she's been doing for me all these years and all of those pink jobs. And it's just doing all of them and looking after her because she can't do anything for herself. It's pretty tiring, and I'm not a young buck anymore. So, but we're doing okay. We take it day to day, and so far, so good.
Well, it sounds like you're both lucky to have one another to look after each other. So, 7 weeks, I think I heard you just say. How much longer do you get to maintain that prestigious caretaker role?
We're not sure. On the 24th, we go back to see the surgeon at the fracture clinic, and he's going to do x-rays and decide whether or not she's able to start walking on it. I hope, please.
Our prayers with you. Yep.
Yeah, and if she could start getting around a little bit in the walker and start doing some of those personal things for herself.
Yeah.
That the last 2 weeks I've been able to get her into her bathtub. She's got one of those modern, it's not a walk-in tub, it's a rising wall tub.
Oh, I've heard about those.
They're fabulous.
Oh, cool.
And so she's able to get in and out of that without much help from me because of all the grab bars we put in. When we renovated that bathroom 7 years ago, we weren't thinking ahead to breaking a leg, but we were thinking ahead to impending old age.
Right.
And it's come in very, very handy. And she's improved an awful lot just since she's been able to bathe every day. Because sponge baths just didn't cut it.
Exactly. I can feel that, and I can relate to that totally.
Yeah.
With the whole, coronavirus pandemic going on, were you even allowed to, be in the hospital with her or close to her? Or?
No. And the funny thing is, she fell on a Wednesday. She was on her way back upstairs from the basement. Like, we've got a bungalow. And here in Canada, we have basements. And one of her offices and my office are in the basement. So she decided, it's time to go up and make lunch. And up she started up the stairs. Now, Anne is severely hard of hearing. And even as a young person, her balance was never good. Well, now it's worse. And she got halfway up the stairs and lost her balance, grabbed for the railing, missed, and fell backwards down the stairs and landed just outside of my office on her back. And thank God we had got a thick Berber rug on the stairs and on the basement floor with a nice thick underpad. So she didn't injure herself except for the leg. She broke the fibula, the tibia, and the ankle on the right leg.
Wow. That's
So
painful. Oh my gosh.
So she had they rushed her into the hospital at midday, and 6 o'clock at night, they finally got her in for her 3-hour surgery. Meanwhile, I'm stuck here. I can't do anything.
Right.
She's texting me on her phone. And because she's hard of hearing, she can't talk on the phone. And so they kept her overnight. And they called me just after the noon hour and said they were not going to release her until I had a hospital bed set up in my house,
Wow.
a commode, a walker. And I had to call them when all that was all set up, and then they would release her. Well, that was at noon. And I called to arrange for all this stuff. They said they'd be here at 4:30 in the afternoon. I said, yay. Next thing I know, Anne's calling at 2:30. She's in the hospital lobby. Where are you guys? Why aren't you picking me up?
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, what's going on? And here it turns out they had an outbreak of COVID on the 6th floor where she was recuperating. So they got all the patients that didn't have to stay out of Dodge.
Yep. No, good idea. And wow, everything about your wife and what you guys have gone through is just, our hearts go out to you. Everybody in the chat window is, sending messages about how sorry they are that you had to go through that. But it sounds like a great way to talk about your book, Reflections, Inspirational Quotes and Interpretations. It's an inspirational read. It's classified on Amazon under religion and spirituality, as well as personal transformation. Share with our audience how this book came about and why you decided to write it.
Well, it's interesting. Back in late 2014 and early 2015, when Nani invited me to become the membership director on the board, she would send all of us on the board, and still does, inspirational messages every day. And she would start a little pep talk online with a quote. Sometimes she would use one of her own. Sometimes she would use ones that she found online. And then, I guess February, late January, early February, she said to me one day, "Can you cover for me and do that for 2 weeks?" I said, "Sure." So I did that for 2 weeks. And then what I did was I did a little commentary with each quote, a few sentences about what it meant to me and why I picked it.
Right.
And she liked that so much that she said, why don't you just continue doing this for good? Okay. So then one day she and I are talking on the phone, and I said to her, she said, you're not blogging too much. And I said, no, I can never figure out what I want to say. I don't know what to blog about. And it frustrates me, makes me angry. I don't want to blog because I don't know what to blog about. She said, well, why don't you do blogs about these quotes that you've been putting on the daily inspiration thing for the board, and write up a long reflection on it. Oh, I never thought of that. So I tried a couple and made up a blog, and I called it My Inspiration. And I got a really good feedback from this.
Uh-huh.
Well, a year and a half later, I decided to rework 50 of those and put them in the book.
So how long did it take you to put together reflections or to write it?
Usually a couple of days for each one,
Uh-huh.
because I would pick out a blog that spoke to me and I thought, I can get my teeth into that one. But then I think, So I do a little research about who the author of it was, try to get a handle on who they were. And then I would just let it sit and percolate for a day or so. And then I'd come back to the computer and I would start writing. So very, very rarely did I pick the quote and then write the reflection on the same day. I always preferred to let it percolate, sleep on it. And like, I'm a firm believer that our subconscious mind works on things that are concerning us, that we have to make decisions about without us really being aware of it.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
very often solves the problem. And many of us have experienced, oh, solution came out of nowhere. And I've always believed that, no, it didn't come out of nowhere. That you finally made contact with your subconscious mind, and there was the answer. So I try purposely to relax and try to establish that contact with my subconscious, see what it came up with. And
it worked. Yeah, no kidding.
It works, but it's not something I can force.
Makes perfect sense. So I'm going to go ahead and look in the chat room and see if we have some questions. We certainly have an awful lot of positive comments about you, your writing. So let's see if we have any other comments I want to really bring out. Shirley said, John, you're so right. Our minds do work for us when we are not even conscious of it. It happened to me. I'd have to agree with that. That's a great comment, Shirley. And then Yvette, I've read several of John's books, including the one he's speaking about, and I've enjoyed them all. So obviously you have a lot of fans.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear.
So at one point in your book, John, you reflect on your writing, and I think it's in the Steve Jobs chapter, as a second job you love. Before retiring to your second job that you're doing now, did you believe you would be the fabulous writer that you are today, as reflected by all these comments?
I wish I was. No, I never saw myself that way. And I'll tell you something, I've been an avid reader all my life. Mm-hmm. And it started with my mother forcing me to sit on the kitchen floor while she was preparing dinner every night and made me read to her. And every time I came across a word she knew darn well I didn't understand, she'd ask me, what does that mean? Get out the dictionary. Well, it got to the point where I would bring the dictionary with me, so I didn't have to get up and come back. And anyway, and then she started taking me to the library, the children's library, and I'd bring home 4 or 5 books, and I'd read them, and I became a very avid reader. And as I graduated into more adult books in my high school years, I often thought, wow, these people that write these books, they're like gods. Where do they come up with these ideas? They create these characters. They've got these plots and subplots that they're weaving around, and blew my mind. So to think that I could ever do that, never. I never aspired to be a writer because I never believed I had the wherewithal to do it. And then my second last year teaching, a former student of mine asked me to write the book about teaching, an inspirational book about teaching. And so I did. And he and his mother and father had a small publishing company.
Okay.
Because the mother was a writer and he was a writer. Now, this guy was the most gifted student I ever taught in 35 years.
Wow.
I gave him, he scored 100% final mark on his grade 13 history, back in the days when Ontario had grade 13.
My goodness.
And he's the only student that's ever scored above 95 with me. But, you know, and every time he hands stuff in, I spent more time with his papers looking for something to take a mark off. I can't keep giving this guy 100, 100, 100. But, oh, he was terrific. And he was, for as brilliant as he was very humble. And he didn't lord it over the other students. And he was just a real pleasure to have in the class. So he talked me into writing this book. It won an IPPY award.
Nice.
And so then he said, why don't you write a novel? I says, well, I've never written a novel. I don't know anything about writing a novel. He says, you didn't know anything about writing an award-winning book either.
Yep, the kid's a smart kid.
Yeah. So he talked me into it, and that's how Passion and Struggle came about.
Nice.
So he was writing a science fiction series.
Oh.
And 8 books.
Yikes.
And the first 4 books was one war. Last 4 books were another war. And then there's this 40-year period of peace between books 4 and 5. So I said to Kenneth, and it was obvious there'd been lots of changes on planet Genesis.
Right.
In the time between, in that peacetime period. And I said, what happened? Why didn't you tell him that story? He said, he wanted to talk about the wars. He didn't care about peacetime. I said, oh, Kenneth, look at the social changes and political changes that happened. Wow, how did they come about? He says, he said, how can you say And I said, look who married who, and look who married who. You know, like, wow.
You know, in your author profile, I reviewed that you know, I know that you've been busy with your wife, but you have always worked on multiple projects. So should we expect to see a sequel to Reflections? And without giving away a lot, if we are, when can we do this?
Interesting. Anne fell on April 22nd, and Reflections 2 was supposed to be released May 11th. Well, it's still waiting in limbo. So sometime this year, I hope.
Awesome. Well, we will look forward to that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take another quick dash over to the Peanut Gallery. And if anyone has a question and they want to raise their hand, that would be great. But I'm seeing comments like, you know, the young man that you spoke of, the Genesis Saga author, they love it. It's great, a great series. You have people.
So my Genesis Saga is to tell the story of that 40 years of peace. So
Yep.
I'm writing inside someone else's series.
There you go.
Shirley.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. I didn't know if Roxy was going to do it for me. I enjoyed the Genesis saga very much. And didn't you have Nani in one of those episodes? Or was that something else?
Well, those were blogs I wrote for a blog tour. And what I did, Rox, was I did a blog tour for the first book, which was Passion and Struggle. And then I did a second blog tour for Treachery and Triumph, which is book 2.
Right.
And for both blog tours, what I did was I made up this scenario where I was visiting with Nani in her office. And I said, how would you like to go to Genesis? She looked at me like I had 3 heads. What are you talking about? So I touched her arm and bingo, she's in a park in Genesis with me.
That was so cool.
How did I get here? And I just looked at her and I said, well, I've got some talents you don't know about yet. So the whole point was she was going to interview some of the main characters from my book.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
It was very, very different and unique.
Yeah,
I never forgot that.
They were fun.
So Ryan added into the chat window, when did you write your first book? When you wrote your first book, did you rely on your reading to know what to do? Is that how you got through it?
Well, I have, and I'm not bragging about this at all, I'd probably be a better writer if I had taken courses on writing, okay, the different kinds of writing. Throughout my teaching career, my big thing in my history classroom was teaching kids how to write about history. From short pieces to long formal research essays. So I taught writing for 35 years. The English department was really upset with me because their students wanted to use my manuals that I developed for my history students for their English papers. And I remember the English head cornered me in the staff room. Who the hell do you think you are? And I said, I'm John Fioravanti. Pleased to meet you. And they said, you can't be telling kids. I said, I'm not telling kids to do anything. I said, I give these kids these booklets to guide them through their history projects. It's their idea to use them for your assignments. So don't lay that one on me. Lay it on you. What are you giving them besides a little 3/4 of a page blurb? And I've got a 22-page guide.
Joy, did you have a question or a comment that you wanted to add?
I just laughed because I experienced the same thing with my students. They usually would like to take some of the things I teach them in class to other classes. And then, for instance, at the end of the year, usually I have a performance, and the English teachers are so mad with me that I'm performing, putting my students on stage, when usually they were the ones who did it before I came to this school. So there was always this, I don't know what to call it, this jealousy between different disciplines, especially when you step over your own discipline. I mean, all the disciplines are supposed to be linked. This is what teachers don't understand. So when you step into other people's, areas, I've forgotten the exact word I was going to use for it, they tend to come after you. And but I persevered. Every year I stepped into their area, did my performances, got their critiques, and they didn't mind at all. So I understand where John was coming from.
Right.
Totally get it. Mara Beth, did you want to add something as well? We have so many teachers on here, I mean, they can totally relate to what you're saying.
Well, I tried very hard not to step on other teachers' toes. And I would say to my students, like, what I'm giving you are guidelines for history papers. History papers and English papers may have some similarities, but they're not the same thing.
Right.
They're not dealing with the same kind of subject matter, so you approach them differently. And I said, with history, what I want you to do is use primary and secondary sources and put together an argument supporting one side of a controversy or another. And I said, with English, you might be doing an interpretation of a play or some poetry
Right.
or a novel or short story, and your short story or your subject, that's your primary source.
Right.
Everything else is coming from you. Well, that's a little different approach. Now, the structure of the paper might be similar, but I said, don't look to me to tell you how to do your English project. You know, so,
Yep.
but I still got into trouble. But that I went from that to writing on my own. But you know, Lux, even though I taught writing all those years, I didn't see myself as a novelist.
Right.
And it wasn't until I did A Personal Journey to the Heart of Teaching that I started thinking about, oh, maybe I can do this.
And apparently you can. You've done it very well.
So as long as I've got a good editor to help me out, I'm good.
So, you know, I think that subjects tend to blur together anyhow. Now, I know that you're an RRBC and a RISA member. Can you kind of let people know what your experience has been like during your tenure with both organizations?
It's been very intense, and that's in a good way. But ever since Nani invited me onto the board, and I came on board as the membership director, and within 6 months I was vice president, membership director, producer of Rave Waves, host of 3 or 4 of the Rave Waves shows. I was wearing so many hats, I didn't know whether I was coming or going. So I had a very intense experience within the club.
Right.
And it kept me very busy. So busy, I wasn't doing a whole lot of writing. Just like Nani's complained, well, she doesn't complain, but it's a stated fact that she puts in so many hours every day that where is there time and energy for her writing?
Right.
Which is very frustrating.
So what do you think makes a great member of this amazing club? What's it take?
I think you just be your lovable self and be a giving person. You know, some people join the club and they're looking around like, gimme, gimme, gimme. I'm going to park my books in the catalog and just sit back and watch everybody buy them and write up these wonderful reviews, and that's it.
I just have something to say. I just noticed some of the lights coming on some of the windows that don't have video, and I don't know if they're trying to get in to ask a question, but I've been noticing Mara Beth quite a bit, and I noticed Ronnie, and I noticed Joy, I think. So I don't know if that means anything, but I thought you should know, Roxy, just in case.
No, thank you, Shirley. I appreciate that. Does anyone have a questions at this point that we need to go? If you could raise your hand, that way I can call on you correctly. I have seen the lights as well. I just, I don't know if someone wants to comment. I'm open to questions. Joy, Barbeth?
No, I'm good.
I'm okay too. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I put my comment on the chat, so I'm good.
Okay. So outside of the unusual circumstances that you're in right now with your caretaking duties, do you normally structure your days around writing?
No, and that's one of the problems I have in terms of not being disciplined in that way, the way I should. I've known people who put the first part of their day and dedicate it to writing. They'll try to write X number of words. And then once they've done that, then they've got other things they do. I would prefer to write first thing in the morning when I'm fresh.
Yeah.
And that's more important as the years go by, you know, that becomes more of a factor, because late at night, forget it. As a young man, I used to be able to write anytime. But
Hey, you're busier now.
oh, I'm not exactly, you know, elderly yet, but you know, I'm no spring chicken either.
Yeah, well, you're not elderly as long as you keep having a new idea every day. So Linnea actually had a great question in the window, and she was wondering what your favorite quote might be.
From the book?
Yeah,
Oh gosh, I don't have one.
you don't have a favorite, huh?
No. No, as I said before, I selected these quotes because they spoke to me in different ways.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would see a quote that was fairly well known. I'd look at it and I'd think about it and think, what am I going to say about that? I haven't a clue. Other than something trite and obvious. And I would keep going and looking until I found something that jumped out and bit me in the knee.
Ooh.
And then I knew, oh, ouch. I can get my teeth into that one. I don't have a favorite. I really don't. So when I pick up the book, there's nothing I turn to in particular.
Okay, so John, I've got one last question. So what writing or life advice would you like to share with all the listeners?
Life advice?
Or writing advice? Pick.
Or writing advice. Okay. Don't be undisciplined like me. No, I think, you know, especially as members of RRBC, we need to be thinking about others and trying to be of service. And I think that was all part of Nani's vision when she created the club, being of service.
Yeah.
And I remember 50 years ago when I first entered university, I had it in my mind that I thought maybe I had a vocation to the Catholic priesthood. So I went into the seminary for my first year. And I'll never forget, the first night at dinner time, we're sitting around this table and they put all the platters and the food in the middle of the table.
Right.
So I started reaching toward the mashed potatoes. And the guy beside me tapped my hand lightly and he said, you don't put any on your plate. I said, oh, whose do I put it on? He said, the people beside you. I looked at him. He wasn't kidding. Oh, okay. So this is what I did. And as the plates were passed around, I'm putting them on the guy on either side of me. And by the time all the plates have been passed around, I looked down and my plate was full.
There you go.
And what a lesson. You know, he could have told me that. He just said, no, do it. And see what happens. So, service. It's, you know, you're going to be well looked after when you're looking after others.
What a great comment. And, you know, John, I can see that we're just about out of time. So thank you so much for visiting with us today and helping me to make Eyes on the Book an extra special show.
Thank you, Rox. I really
I'd like
appreciate
to
it.
suggest 2 more books that you should keep your eyes on. One is a wonderful little micro read by John Podolsky called Unhinged. It's an excellent book by all reports. It's one of Nani's favorites she mentioned earlier, so I would pick it up. The other one is Reflections of a Misfit by P.T.L. Perrin. again, this is a book that you may have a lot of fun reading because it was also recently added to the inspiration category in the RRBC catalog. You can find both of these titles in the RRBC catalog, and we suggest you pick up copies from Amazon or any other online retail where books are sold legally. Remember, if you miss a live show, you can always find each and every episode in the archives. I'm your host, Rox Berkey. Thank you for joining us for another segment of Rave Waves, where all things literary are our passion. Until next time, keep reading and keep your eyes on today's books. Stay safe and stay home. Thank you, John. Bye.
Thank you all for coming.
You.
So see you in the